in order to really stay grounded and well in this world that is very wild and uncertain and ever changing, it's important to consider and include the soul in our own calculations and assessments of what it is that's really best for ourselves, what it is that's really good for ourselves. Approaching it in this way raises some interesting questions about what's the purpose of medicine. This kind of illness, when we have time to know about it, accept it, reconcile that as best we can, really make space for spiritual and relational reckoning in ways that not many other things do. Hello friends, welcome back to another episode of Ponder and Practice. Thank you so much for joining me here today. It is, of course, as ever, such a pleasure and an honor to be able to share some time and space with you, so thanks for hanging out with me. So I have recorded and re-recorded and written and rewritten this so many times, and I think finally I maybe got it right. I had started working on this a number of weeks ago with the intention of talking about taking a holistic view of meds for mental health. And at that time, this topic came up because I was listening to a talk from Michael Berg, who is he owns the Kabbalah Center, I don't know. Anyway, he's a big teacher in Kabbalah. And what he said was, where you invest your thought, you invest your soul, something to that effect. And when I heard that, it struck me pretty profoundly, because I think that medication and mental health, when it's used properly, when it's well employed, this really allows folks to have the space and the energy to begin to invest their thought where it will provide the greatest returns, where they can start to do what they want to do with their lives instead of being run by or beholden to these thought patterns that are not awesome. And certainly for folks who, even if folks don't have a mental illness, it's human nature that if we don't pay attention to what we're thinking, if we don't have intention and direct our thoughts where is most helpful and beneficial, then, we do tend towards anxiety and fear and all these kinds of things. This is a very universal human thing that happens, and evolutionarily it makes sense for our health and survival and whatnot. It's better to be afraid and not get hurt than to not be afraid and then get hurt, right? And this is why folks like, his name is going to escape me, but that one rock climber who they did the whole free solo, and they scanned his brain, and his amygdala are actually smaller than your average person, which is why he has a much different risk tolerance than most of us do, and is willing and able to just climb like basic, almost sheer rock faces and be okay about it. At any rate, but I digress. So that's where this had started for me. And then as I was writing and rewriting, I was like, nothing was quite really feeling right. And what I think this boils down to is, I think we forget about the soul and when we're talking about medicine. And so what I want to talk about today is where this fits in, where illness and health and religion and what we call medicine, how that all comes together and how those play together. And so to really get into this conversation, it's important to figure out, like, where does the soul sit in all of this? And not everyone is going to agree on this, and that's totally fine. I think that what we're talking through applies to folks whether you think that your soul is here to achieve a certain aim in this lifetime, or if you're somebody who just thinks that you want to make the most of your life, and so how do you do that? And achieve the potential that is available to you professionally and personally and maybe athletically and all these different kinds of things. Personally, my spirituality and my belief is that our souls come into the physical form with an agenda for this lifetime. I think that we do this multiple times. I do believe in reincarnation. And while the particulars of this belief really vary across religious doctrines and theologies, that's how I approach this conversation. And whether you're somebody who believes in reincarnation or not, if you're somebody who believes that the soul is here to achieve certain aims, to learn and to grow and to really kind of check off kind of items on the syllabus of life school. I hate that phrase, but whatever. Anyway, regardless, we need to be firing on all cylinders, mind, body, and the unseen thing that comes into being when we are born and then leaves when we die. I call that the soul. Some folks call it the spirit. Doesn't really matter. What does matter is that approaching it in this way raises some interesting questions about what's the purpose of medicine. So is modern medicine best used really only as a tool for the physical, or are there implications for the non-physical as well? Is there a reason or reasons why we do get sick beyond the obvious fallibility of the human body? I think these are all really interesting questions to ask and to be thinking about and talking about. For some folks, illness really is nothing more than like inconvenient at best and like really life-shattering at worst. You know, getting a flu like right at the 11th hour of a critical deadline, it's like, oh, why is this coming at the worst possible time? And then there are incurable infections and cancers and all sorts of awful things, accidents that really steal away precious breath far, far, far too soon. And so I don't want to make light of that. Like, this is real and difficult to grapple with. There's another side, however, which is that getting sick can really provide a moment of reflection and an opportunity to redirect our lives. And so if we think about somebody who's diagnosed with diabetes, right? If they take that in stride and sort of let that shake them up a little bit, then it's like, okay, well, let me get this figured out. How do I redo some things? How do I adjust my habits so that I don't end up losing my vision or my foot or something like this? Add in some exercise, adjusting diet, and overall improving quality of life for themselves and for their family and friends. I also know of cases where terminal cancer has facilitated healing of bad blood within families or within close communities. This kind of illness, when we have time to know about it, accept it, and reconcile that as best we can, really make space for spiritual and relational reckoning in ways that not many other things do. That being shaken up in that way and having that destabilizing force can really snap priorities into focus and help folks to heal in ways that are not always clear and apparent. Something like, you can also have something like a benign heart scare where somebody ends up in the hospital. It turns out, nope, you're fine. Like, this was just, something went wonky, or maybe it was muscle pain that we thought was heart pain. Even something like that can really help to snap folks back into focus and like, okay, wait a minute, what am I doing with my life? And do I need to reprioritize here? There's another aspect that I think is worth talking about, which is that health and illness, where there's this secular thought that we can have where it's like, oh, this is just inconvenient, or like, whoa, I'm really shaken up, I need to reevaluate my life and my choices. There's also a place where it gets tangled up with philosophy and religion or faith or spirituality and that kind of thing. I know that there are everything I'm about to say, I don't have any judgment for. These are just examples and ways to think about this and conceptualize of how different folks think about this and move through their lives. But there are some iterations of, I'm familiar with Christian fundamentalism that really will reject any kind of conventional modern medical care in favor of prayer and God's will. And the rationale there is that, like, well, I wouldn't be sick if God didn't make me sick. And so who am I to really question who am I to question that, first of all? And then second of all, if this is from God, what right do I have as a human to try and correct that or fix that? It's not, I don't have that power. That's solely with God and should only be with God. There are other religious teachings that will welcome some medical measures, but may draw a line at specific quote unquote heroic measures like resuscitation or feeding tubes and this sort of thing. I will say that I do have citations in my blog post. I will certainly have that linked in the description below. I may or may not remember to link the specific articles that I have in that blog post. But anyway, you can find them through there. So there's that. But I digress. There are also folks who think that their illness is not necessarily caused by God, but by demons or demonic forces or, evil unseen forces. And so in these cases, an exorcism or some sort of spiritual intervention is also the appropriate treatment. Not a religion, but Stoicism has a teaching that the obstacle is the way. So how someone as an individual responds to and moves through something that is happening is just as important as how that illness is treated. And then if we think about Kabbalah, there's an assertion there that everything that we experience, bar none, is for the benefit of the soul and is really designed to reveal ever more light of the Creator in our own lives and in the world if we're proactive and non-reactive in dealing with and rising to that challenge. And so these kinds of beliefs show up with us when we seek treatment. These kinds of beliefs don't leave when we get sick. And so religious belief and faith and philosophy and spirituality matter. It matters so much when we're talking about health and wellness and illness. So what then are we calling medicine, right? If an exorcism or maybe the work of a shaman or a spiritual healer can be as effective as an antipsychotic medication in alleviating hallucinations, who's to say? Of course, regulatory boards have a lot to say about this. Insurance panels have a lot to say about this. This maybe sounds a little bit glib and I don't mean it to, but like demonic possession doesn't pop up in the ICD-10 diagnostic codes, and that's what we use to code visits to get paid by insurance, right? So it's also tough, impossible to get a procedure code for an insurance reimbursement for something like an exorcism or spiritual healing and whatnot. But there are cases where these things are as effective as modern medicine, and so but we continue to not necessarily include them. In 2010, I was studying herbal medicine, and something that I often heard is this idea that medicine is anything that helps. So this raises an interesting question of like, medicine is what helps what exactly? Because then the question is like, well, okay, like junk food and booze, are these medicines? Cigarettes and like, these things that we do that are not necessarily good for us over the long term, but in the moment really help to take the edge off of having to be present for this life and deal with emotions that are coming up or difficulties that are coming up. Scrolling on social media is another example that comes to mind, or just watching an endless stream of videos on Netflix or YouTube, that sort of thing. Are these medicine? In the moment, again, it helps us to play at like maybe enthusiasm or curiosity or interaction, but I ultimately no, I don't think that these kinds of things count. With the caveat that nothing that we do doesn't serve us in some way. It doesn't matter if we're talking about smoking or drinking or raw juicing or lifting heavy or fast foods or investing wisely or blowing our paychecks on things that we really don't need and we know that we don't need. There's nothing that we do that we don't get something out of, or else we wouldn't do it, right? That would be silly. And that something may be a distraction in the moment. It may be a better quality of life down the line. It's hard to bridge the two. It can be done, but you get my gist. As an aside, the better awareness and compassion we can have for ourselves that our habits do in fact serve us, they do something for us that can help us to adjust behaviors in ways that are more beneficial for us over the long term. So getting back to this question of what exactly is medicine, and medicine being anything that helps, at that time when I was hearing that, more than a decade ago, I would say that medicine is something that helps alleviate suffering. At this point, I would clarify that and color that a little bit in that medicine is something that helps folks come back to who they are. It is something that helps improve quality of life over the long term. And it's something that helps folks make peace with who they are and where they are and what they are capable of and what potentials exist for them, and helps them to build the courage to continue to strive for and reach for those things and to become the person that they can be and who they want to be. So this is not an exhaustive list, but it's a place to start. It's kind of convenient to boot the soul out of medicine, to not think about the non-physical medicine. Conventional modern medicine is strictly about the physical, right? And so it makes sense in some ways that we wouldn't be talking about it, but also we need to be talking about it because it's an arbitrary separation to think, oh, the body and the mind and the soul or the spirit are different. They're related and interconnected. But it's really hard to do, like double-blind clinical trials on matters of the spirit. And as another aside, I looked up prayer. And PubMed actually turns up 2,055 results on prayer, which I thought was way more than I expected to see, and I was really encouraged to see that. So, this is something that is being thought about, talked about, studied, looked at. Certainly, there's more to the story than can be captured in a study, I think. It's much easier to do trials on medications. You give half of folks a sugar pill or a placebo and half of folks the actual medication and see what happens, right? This is much easier. We know how to do this. The logistics are very clear. The measurements are very clear. There are different outcomes that are looked for, and if, one of the groups meets those outcomes or doesn't, and then we do statistical analysis, like does that pan out against the placebo or not, and voila, new medication on the market. It's obviously not that simple, but it kind of is that simple. And yet the soul and belief and faith really creep up on both sides. Certainly patients show up with a primary concern, but they're also complete and nuanced folks with beliefs and biases that color how they perceive and respond to the care that they receive and the nature of their illness, as we've talked about. And this also, providers and institutions are not immune from this either. Religion has funded hospital systems for centuries, and still today, there are many hospitals around the United States that are run by various religious groups, for better or worse. I know the Catholic Sisters of Mercy are known for their work in healthcare, as are the Seventh-day Adventists. There are a number of religious nonprofits of all varieties that contribute in one way or another to medical care, education, research, all this kind of thing. And this makes sense in a lot of ways because religions often dictate and encourage compassion. We need to help the poor and the sick and those who are unable to help themselves. It's our duty as humans to do what we can to allay the suffering of folks who are ill and who are struggling in this way. And so to provide charitable services or to donate towards those services according to the resources that we ourselves are afforded is not only appropriate, we need to be doing this. It's part of what it means to be human on this planet because we live in community, and so we need to support folks in the way that we are able. And so what, right? I've said a lot of things here, and like, how do we bring this home? How do we make sense of this? Is this actionable in any meaningful way? And to be completely honest, I don't know. That's unsatisfying, but this is something that I have just been really grappling with, wrangling with, trying to make sense of in a meaningful way, because like I've said ad nauseum a billion times in all of the content that I've ever made, mind, body, and spirit go together. And so if we look at one piece of this, for example, like take our food supply. In large part, our food supply is not good for our bodies. Highly processed food, there are no ifs, ands, or buts about it, is not great for us. It causes physical illness, it causes mental illness. In my experience, and what I've seen personally in folks close to me and clinically, when folks are eating highly processed foods that are bereft of those naturally occurring nutrients, there ends up being a pretty significant wedge that's driven between the body, mind, and the soul. I mean, there's a reason why there are various dietary guidelines in various religions, why fasting is a part of so many traditions across the board. The type of food that we eat, the quality and the quantity matter when it comes to both our physical and our spiritual health. I'm not going to be able to place this quote, and I apologize, but I have also heard it said that the food that we eat is the most information that we ever give our body internally. Rudolf Steiner in Anthroposophical Medicine has this idea that the food that we eat, we have to break down kind of the spiritual essence of that food in order to make it our own. We have to like take out everything that's not us so that we can put in everything that is us so that it becomes part of our bodies. And then I've also heard Jenna Zoe talk about this in terms of the food that we eat provides, she doesn't talk about it in that way, but she talks about the fact that the food that we eat provides information to our bodies. And so depending on what we're taking in, that's going to tell our bodies different things. And I don't think that that's necessarily untrue. And then the most tangible argument to be made is that like chemically what's in our food or is not in our food is going to impact what our bodies have available to work with, right? You can't build a house without lumber. You can't build a house without bricks, whichever you prefer. So like if you're not eating the nutrients, your body's not going to be able to do the things that it needs to do. And I've seen, I can't tell you how many folks who I've seen who, they come in to work with me and they're like, I'm super depressed and anxious and my mental health is all over the place. I can't think, I have brain fog, whatever. If they go through some dietary changes and like make some adjustments there, I've had so many folks come back and be like, oh my gosh, I feel so much better. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. That's just one example where there is a really strong interplay between all these aspects of our being. As providers, I think it's important to consider the spiritual health of our patients. And this is difficult because most providers are crunched for time. They're just trying to like do what's in front of them and get through it and move on, and kind of, the administrative work is a ton and whatnot. But I do think that always in a way that is open and non-judgmental. We're never trying to coerce anyone ever. But where do two pieces here? One is having some time and space to reflect on where do our own beliefs and biases and faith show up in our practice, and are there places where those are very helpful in work with patients and clients, and are there places where that clashes with the beliefs of our patients or clients? And we have to know where we sit to be able to start to make that discernment. And we also have to have some awareness of how our patients and clients, how their beliefs show up, and how those play into how they see the symptoms that they're experiencing, how they see the treatments that they're being offered, and then, being able to work with that and really navigate that interaction. And it can be tremendously difficult, for sure. I read a story very recently. I think it was in the book How Doctors Think, which has been a really interesting read. I enjoy it. I'm not finished with it yet. At any rate, I think the story was in there. I didn't find it today when I was just flipping through. But there was a doctor who was working with a patient who was like convinced that there's some like pretty severe symptoms in the hospital, convinced that this had to do with some unseen force that was coming into play. And they had done medications, they had done different protocols, and like nothing was really working. And so this doctor was like, well, can we get somebody in here who's of their spiritual tradition, their religious tradition, and like, let's get that person in there, see if they can help. And sure enough, like that helped to clear things up. And so, it's a valid conversation. Does this happen all the time? No, of course not. Is it even a majority? I don't know. Probably not. But the fact that it does happen, and the fact that if we can have an open enough mind to think that, okay, well, my methods are failing, what other methods are out there, even if they're unconventional, this can be super helpful. On the other side, as patients, it really behooves us to consider the interplay of these aspects of our being, to notice how we feel, mind and soul, when we better care for our bodies. Does meditation or prayer affect our digestion? Does attending Friday or Saturday or Sunday services or Wednesday services help to settle our hearts, help us to feel grounded and like calm in our bodies? Is there a catch in our gut when we show up to our doctor and the first thing, we're anxious about something going on and the first offering they make to us is medication? What kind of fears arise when it's suggested that therapy might be a really good thing to do to help resolve some physical symptoms that your provider thinks might be related to anxiety or depression or ADHD or whatever it is? We talk about this thing called hangry, which happens when our blood sugar dips too low and folks tend to get very irritable and cranky and whatnot. And this is a very kind of clear-cut example of how our bodies and our emotional well-being are intimately tied together. For better or worse, a one-size-fits-all answer really doesn't exist. And so in order to really stay grounded and well in this world that is very wild and uncertain and ever-changing, I just think it's important to consider and include the soul in our own calculations and assessments of what it is that's really best for ourselves, what it is that's really good for ourselves. And if we're willing and able and courageous to engage in this kind of thought and reflection and practices, I think it really can help us to deeply heal ourselves and also support the health and positive growth of the wider world. So, my friend, that is what I have for you here today. Thanks so much for coming along this journey with me. I think we can close the book on episode 18. It's finally done after writing and rewriting and recording and re-recording. Thanks for hanging out. If you liked this video, this episode, if you would hit that thumbs up button, that would be great. Help other folks find the channel and the podcast who would also benefit from it. If you have watched this video, a couple videos before, go ahead and hit subscribe. Why not? You've been here. We're hanging out. That would also be super helpful for me. And also, if you are someone who is looking for a really tangible resource on how to understand and read and work in alignment with your soul's purpose in this lifetime, check out the link below and grab your Human Design virtual reading, which has a ton of practical information in there about the workings of your body, mind, and soul, and kind of what you're here in this lifetime to do, and ways to navigate this life with as much grace and ease as possible. So, all that said, thanks again, my friend, and I will look forward to catching you on the next one. Take care. Bye.